The story of the Tower of Babel, a story that is related to one of the most enigmatic historical buildings to this day, the Sumerian ziggurat. During the course of our story, we will bring you closer to the truth of this story, as well as focusing a little on the legend behind it. Within the story about the Tower of Babel, we first focus on the historical part of it. As we mentioned in the introduction, this building seems to be related to a ziggurat that existed in Babylon and whose writings tell us that it reached 7 floors and 90 meters high. The problem was that the Mesopotamian temples were built in adobe, that is, unbaked mud, and their lower floors were covered with baked bricks so that they would not crumble. For this reason, time and weather conditions caused the building to disintegrate, leaving only the remains of its foundations. The story of the construction of the Tower of Babel and the confusion of languages is narrated in the Old Testament between the stories of Noah and Abraham. At this time, mankind, who shared the same language, decided to settle in the country of Shinar, identified with Mesopotamia. There, the city of Babel was built and a great tower began to be erected with the intention of reaching heaven. Within our story about the Tower of Babel, we must now focus on the legend. According to the Bible, after the flood, people began to create a huge tower that aspired to reach God. It is necessary to see in this context that the ziggurat, as we have explained above, had as its purpose the passage of the divinity from heaven to earth. Therefore, what is commented in the Bible can be related to this building. Continuing with the legend, God, upon learning of the plans that the builders and leaders had, made it so that every time a floor was built, those who worked on the next one changed their language, so that over time it was impossible for them to communicate with those who were on the lower levels. On the other hand, we should know that the Jews, the Sumerians, the Greeks, the Romans, and other peoples, have had among their legends myths related to very high towers and diversity of languages, undoubtedly making references to the possible Sumerian ziggurat. The Tower of Babel is the myth of the creation of the different languages, by which the populations, who once spoke the same language, were dispersed throughout the earth, losing their roots almost completely and deforming the original language until they created a totally different language. Thus there came a time when there was no relationship whatsoever, leaving some vestiges in some specific words. In this way, the relationships between populations became more complicated, so they had to look for methods or symbols to communicate. The biblical text does not describe its forms, but it does mention the materials used in its construction, bricks and tar, which allow us to confirm its relationship with Mesopotamian architecture. In fact, Genesis refers to the tower by the word Migdal, which corresponds to the Akkadian noun zigguratu. This can be translated as Temple Mountain or Mountain Top, and is directly related to the Mesopotamian ziggurats, temples consisting of a series of superimposed terraces whose size decreases progressively until the sanctuary located on the upper level, which is accessed by external ramps or stairs. As is the case with other passages marked by building activity, such as those relating to the Temple of Solomon or the Tower of St. Barbara, many images of the Tower of Babel serve to show the tools and techniques used by medieval builders. Thanks to the inclusion of the group of stonemasons and craftsmen, the viewer is aware of the confusion of languages, staged through the racial diversity or the gesticulation of the builders. Some point to their mouths, indicating that they no longer use them to communicate. Occasionally, the figure of God or of angels and demons participating in the destruction of the building may also appear. From the 14th century onwards, it is common to include a new group of men, apart from the builders, who seem to converse about the works. Among them stands out a character of greater size than the rest, luxuriously dressed and who can hold a rod or staff. It would be Nimrod, legendary Mesopotamian monarch who, according to the Speculum Humani Salvationis, would have directed the construction of the Tower of Babylon. The word Babel derives from the Hebrew verb Babel and means to confuse. In fact, according to the legend, the languages were confused. The Tower of Babel appears in the Christian tradition, but also in ancient Greece and in some East African tribes. Some scholars believe that the Tower of Babel may have been a real construction of ancient Babylon. In this sense, in 1913 some remains were found by the archaeologist Robert Coldway that could correspond to the Tower of Babel. Coldway that could correspond to the tower. It was supposed to have a square base with 92 meters on each side, 60 meters high and weighing some 400,000 tons. It was made of adobe and brick. It had large terraces through which one climbed to the top of the tower. It is said that the tower was destroyed by the Arameans and Syrians and rebuilt several times. This year Professor of Babylonian History at the University of London, Andrew George, examined a 6th century BC tablet found in Babylon more than 100 years ago. On the tablet is a drawing of a building with a step structure and a man with a scepter. Professor George understands that the man is Nebuchadnezzar I, the ruler of Mesopotamia. In addition, the tablet bears an inscription that reads, Tower of the Temple of Babylon. Therefore, George argues that the tablet is proof of the actual existence of the Tower of Babel. The tablet analyzed by George describes that various peoples from the Mediterranean and the Persian Gulf participated in the construction of the tower. This could explain the use of different languages by the people who attended the construction. The actual site where the tower stood is located in Al-Khazar, in the southern part of Baghdad. The Tower of Babel represents the spread of the various languages spoken in the world and the beginning of something as important to humans as communication. It also represents the sin of pride, by the will of wanting to reach heaven and, therefore, God, to look like Him. If you liked the video, share it and subscribe to my channel to be aware of more stories. See you next time.